that was kind of my reaction without showing it to begin with. I was wonderful to watch this speaker. That was good she talked to me. And it, but you know that's actually at the same time, he instituted the Lord's Supper. I was worshiping.
This is for those.
Really don't think
Good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome. Good to see everybody here today. Glad that you're with us. We're back to 1010. This quarter in this class, we are studying Project 1010, where we are looking at various scriptures in the Bible that at chapter 10, verse 10, have some unique and interesting lessons for us. I feel like I set this up every week, but I hope it's not terribly redundant and repetitive to you. This was an interesting little kind of genesis to this class, because over the course of conversation with some of the elders, we were discussing some of our favorite verses, and it came out that two of us have a favorite verse that happens to be a something, book of the Bible, chapter 10, verse 10. And that got us looking at, well, I wonder what other 10:10 verses are out there that could make for an interesting study. And so this class kind of became the project that flowed out of that discussion. And so today we're going to be in 1 Corinthians. Today in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 10. and was doing some study this week about the question: what are the most socially acceptable sins? And today, what I would like to discuss with you is what I think might be one of the most socially acceptable sins. Now, you recognize I'm saying all of that tongue-in-cheek, because just because something may be socially acceptable doesn't mean that it's any less a sin. So don't let me dissuade you from what you know to be true. But I would suggest to you that one of the most socially acceptable sins, outside perhaps speeding, outside of that, perhaps the most socially acceptable sin that we have today in our culture is complaining. The topic of complaining. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. I did some looking at what are the things people commonly complain about in America. The most common complaints revolve around things like telemarketers, poor customer service. I liked this one because it was across the United States, and I think of myself, there's big places in the country where I wouldn't expect this would be true. Feeling cold. Feeling cold. People are always cold. No matter where you walk into any building, and it's too cold for some people. It's just too cold. That's a very common complaint. And so these are some of the things that people generally have as common complaints. I got to thinking about, specifically here in Marysville, if I had to make a list of the complaints that I hear, just out in the community, the things that I think are probably true. Number one would probably be traffic. Number two is probably closely related. That's roundabouts. Number three is how many lines at Kroger, Walmart, or Meijer actually have a teller, a clerk, a cashier. And of late, the one I've heard the most about is property tax. When we talk about these ideas of things that we complain about, what I want us to do today is I want us to take this idea of complaining and step outside of social popular convention and step back into what does Scripture really say? Because I think what we're going to find as we analyze this topic today is that what in our world today is accepted as just common practice, it's just something we all do, is more real, more accurately, a measure of our heart than we really want to give credit to. Complaining. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 10. Paul is writing to the church there at Corinth, and he says this: "And do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel." Well, right there at the beginning, we start to look at that and we go, "Ooh, wait a second. You talk about sins that are deserving of instant death. We can think of some sins that you're like, yeah, boy, send that destroying angel and let's wipe some of this out. Those wicked people, those evil, because that's always the things that are out there. The murderers, the child molesters. There are these different realms of sin that we look at and say, boy, we can all agree that is something that deserves the absolute drop the hammer. But then you go, wait a second, complaining? You're putting complaining in that kind of category, complaining in that kind of seriousness, that kind of really drastic response. That's exactly what we see. To God, complaining is more than just a socially acceptable practice that we all do as part of our normal interactions with other people. It's actually a very clear indication of the status of our heart. And it's something that we need to be very careful about and very considerate of. There's no such thing as just complaining. In fact, I think that we actually create entire social circles around complaining. There are people with whom we interact on a daily basis, or maybe not a daily basis, but on a regular basis, that if you'll be honest with yourself, the entirety of those conversations, you go into those knowing this is when we're going to vent. We're going to get together and we're going to spill the tea. We're going to get together, we're going to fuss about, whatever it is that this common themes are that we always fuss about. I have in my life people that I know are like that. I have people that I know on a regular basis. This is going to be the topic of discussion when they call, when we get together, when we spend time, because that's just what the predisposition is for. And if I'm not careful, I find that I'm not only the recipient of that, but I'm an active contributor to that. And I think if you'll be honest, you'll agree that you too sometimes have situations, circumstances, particular people that you seem to be very free and flowing with complaints and things that you're critical of. And I do too. I think one of the things about complaining, that besides the fact that it's so socially acceptable, it's so normal, it's so expected, everybody does it, it's just something that, is part of our common interaction with humanity. The other things that we attribute to complaining make it easier to fall into. You may be like me. There are circumstances that make it easier for you to fall into a complaining mindset. You know the old adage, hungry, angry, lonely, and tired? There's an old saying that anytime you find yourself in any kind of a negative emotional cycle, you should stop and ask yourself, you should halt and you should ask, what might be behind this? Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? Because those are qualities, those are situations in life that lead us down negative mindset. But what about times when we feel unappreciated? What about times when we feel unnoticed? What about situations that you look at and you think, that's not fair? Circumstances that you look at your life, your circumstances, your situation in life, and you think to yourself, that's not what I expected. That's not what I deserve. That's not what I worked hard for. And what we can do is, without consciously choosing to, we can substantiate, we can validate, we can affirm, we can approve of our complaining because of the circumstances that are put upon us. I'm not really complaining. It's because of all this. It's because of what's going on. It's because of what somebody else is doing. It's because of the situation I'm in. And so we justify this kind of a complaining attitude. Now, the first thing I want to say before we get into this conversation deeply is that there's a difference between honestly bringing a burden before God and run-of-the-mill complaining that we do to our friends and neighbors and family members. And we need to make sure that we distinguish those. God is very, very clear throughout many examples in His scriptures and many teachings that we can and will look at today, and many, many more that we could. He's very clear that He wants us to bring our concerns before Him. He wants us to come before Him, and He wants us to say, these are circumstances and situations that have caused me agitation. These are circumstances and situations that cause me annoyance. And God, I want to hold this before you, and I don't think this is fair, and I don't think this is right, and I want to see you work in these ways. I mean, the Psalms are replete. Go back through the Psalms and look at all of these Psalms that we sometimes call imprecatory, or we call them Psalms of oh goodness, the word just shot out of my head. There's a fancy word that just means complaint. And it's the way we go to God and we talk to God about the things we're upset about. There's a really fancy word, and I'm going to kick myself because 10 minutes after this class is over, it's going to hit me, and I'm going to go, oh, yeah, goodness sakes. And I'm going to complain to somebody about how I messed that up. And that's going to be the thing that I remember about today's class. I want us from the outset to understand a couple of different things about this topic. One, this is very important to God. This is a very, very concerning situation. And it's one that we cannot expect the standards of our world to determine for us as Christians how we go about dealing with it. Second, there is nothing that we can bring before God from an honest and sincere heart that is not valid, that's not concerning to Him. He is concerned for the things we're concerned about. When we see inequity in the world, when we see hardship, when we see things that are unfair, when people treat us in ways that are improper and hurtful, God is there saying, bring these to me. I want to bear these burdens with you. I want to bear these burdens for you. I want to bear these burdens alongside you. But what we see in Scripture is that there is a proper and right way to deal with the hardships of life. And there's a way that the world tells us is the right way, that can lead us down a road that God is very, very unhappy with. Anytime God gives us a good outlet for something, and we choose a bad outlet for it, we find ourselves in a very, very difficult situation. It's true with our anger. God tells us how to deal with our anger. And he doesn't tell us that having anger is wrong. It's true when it comes to the sexual needs that we have as humans. There is a natural inclination that we have. There's a natural drive that we have towards sexual things. And God says, here is a good and proper way for that to be focused, and here's an improper way. And anytime we find ourselves listening to the world and saying, here's how you deal with this, here's this natural drive, this natural inclination that you have as a human, and the world tells us, here's how you deal with it, we need to be very, very, very cautious of that. We need to be very careful about that. And we need to go back and ask, what does God say is the proper way to handle this? And when it comes to a topic like complaining, I think this is an area where all of us can really benefit from kind of some recentering back into what the Bible says. I have some discussion here at the end, some things I'd really like to interact with you on. I want to set the table a little bit, kind of set the biblical principle for some of these ideas, and then I want to hear from you. So I'm going to try to go really quick through my part where I'm going to talk a lot, and get really quickly to the discussion so that we can really interact on this in a way that hopefully will be particularly meaningful and significant to you. First thing I want to do is I want to go back to the context of this particular passage. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul is talking to the church at Corinth about a very specific situation. Paul has gone back in history and he's captured this moment in the history of God's people where complaining and grumbling had enormous, terrible consequences, and he's using this as an example for the early church to say, learn from the past. The Old Testament is given to us specifically for the purpose of learning those lessons. One of my favorite historical figures is Admiral Nimitz, famous in World War II. And he said, it is my duty to learn from the mistakes of others because God's not going to give me enough time to make all of those mistakes for myself. It's important for us to be able to go back and to look historically and to understand principles that we can learn from the poor choices of previous generations so that we don't repeat them, so that we don't make those true in our lives. That's exactly what Paul's doing here. Paul is saying, here is a temptation, the temptation to grumble and complain and gripe, and to get into a negative mindset. And he says, here's an example of a time when that happened. He goes back to the days of the children of Israel when they were wandering in the wilderness. And you know the story well. They were in slavery in Egypt. God has come and graciously freed them from that slavery. He parted the sea. He fed them with manna. He sent quail, which incidentally was a result of grumbling, but we'll get to that in a moment. He led them with the fiery pillar at night. He led them with the cloud during the day. He protected them. He brought them military victories. He kept his enemies away from them, even down to the little minute details where he says things like, I didn't let your shoes wear out. I didn't let your clothes fall apart. That's the kind of care that I gave you. Go back and look. Look at what I've done for you. Look at how my presence blessed you. And in response to all that God had done, they were overcome with the spirit of grumbling and griping and complaining. And that griping and complaining took their focus off of God and onto their problems. That focus of griping and complaining, that hard-heartedness, refused to let them see the blessings that God had given and focused them on what they didn't have or what they thought was unfair or what they still needed or what they still thought they needed and what they wanted. It led them down a path of idolatry, looking to find answers to their questions outside of God, which, may I just say to you, idolatry is alive and well today. Anytime we find ourselves listening to another source giving us direction in our lives other than what God has given us, we're falling into the same kind of idolatry that they did in the wilderness. Now, none of us are going out there and melting down our earlobes to make golden calves today, but that doesn't change the fact that we're doing what they were doing. We were looking for answers to life's problems outside of God's direction. And because of that, they fell into immorality. They tested God. And they grumbled. Here's the first thing I want us to recognize. One of the things that grumbling does is it removes from us the ability to truly be grateful for what we do have. One of the things that the mindset of a grumbling heart does is blind us to the vast blessings that we have in God. The children of Israel had their entire spiritual identity in God. And yet, because of the hardships they faced and their focus on those hardships, they were blind to everything that God had done. The church of Corinth was in a similar kind of circumstance. The church at Corinth had experienced the great wealth of God's gracious blessings in their life. This is a church that had transformed from the absolute pit of immorality to a new and better way of living in Jesus Christ. They had been given a new life. They'd been given a new hope. They'd been given a new direction. They'd been given a new identity. Can you see the parallels to the children of Israel? Very similar kinds of situations. And Paul is drawing connections, and he's saying, do you see what they did? Do you see in all of their blessings and all their transformation and all the blessings of God's presence in their life in ancient Israel, what they did? And Corinth, you're in jeopardy of going down the same path. You're in jeopardy of doing the same thing, making the same mistakes. The church of Corinth was blessed, and yet they were on the point of perhaps falling into a grumbling mindset, just as the people of Israel had. In God's eyes, grumbling is not a small thing. Grumbling is rarely about surface issues. Now, surface issues are what we attribute our grumbling to. Surface issues are those things that we point at and we complain about. But in many ways, those surface issues reveal something deeper about what's really going on. We complain about the weather. But at our heart, we're not really as concerned about the weather as what kinds of things it's keeping us from doing or causing us to not do that we want to do. That's really the problem. We're not really mad that it's raining. We're really mad because we had other plans that rain now has interrupted. We complain about the busyness of our schedule. Well, at the root of it, we're probably not as upset about the busyness of the schedule as we are the fact that we are probably the ones that put ourselves in that busy schedule, and we can't be mad at ourselves, so it's easier to be mad at these circumstances out here. We're mad about the inconvenience of a long line at the grocery store. But partly we're mad about the long line at the grocery store because we're thinking to ourselves the things that we want to be doing, the things we should be doing, the fact that this is totally unfair, that there are 9 other counters here that all could be filled with cashiers, and because of that, I have every reason to be upset with this. We're mad about a delay waiting for an airplane. We're mad about the delay of the airplane, not necessarily because it's going to be an extra hour of us sitting there in an air-conditioned room while we buy way overpriced Pepsis and sit through the delay, as the fact that there's something else we want to be doing. There's something else that we would rather be doing. You see, so much of complaining really reveals statements in our heart like, God's not giving me what I think I deserve. God's not leading me well or the way I want to be led. God's timing is frustrating. God's provision is not enough. God probably really doesn't care. You see, these are the dangers of a complaining heart. The grumbling that we attribute to these external circumstances and situations in our life are actually just those situations revealing the truth of what's really in our hearts and how so much of our life is misaligned with everything that we read in Scripture that we should be focused on. And it's not a matter of not seeing God. It's not a matter of not experiencing God's presence. It's not a matter of not being blessed by God. The children of Israel saw that. Every morning when they woke up and they threw open the doors of their tents and they stepped outside and crunch, crunch, crunch all over food that was just waiting for them to pick up and eat. They're right there in front of them. The bounty of God is evident. It's not a question of looking around and saying, is God doing anything? Every day when they looked up in the sky and they saw this big, huge cloud with this pillar where they knew this is God's presence. God is watching over us. God is protecting us. Every day when those flocks of quail would come flying into camp and just wait to be caught so you could eat them and enjoy them. And there's no question that they saw the provision of God. The real question was a matter of, did they appreciate the provision of God? My friends, every single day that we're alive. We're surrounded by ample evidence of the goodness of God in our lives. The grumbling of our heart is not a testimony to the fact that we truly have been treated unfairly, or that we truly don't have the blessings of God, or that God has turned his back on us. The grumbling of our heart is a blindness to see that, and a choice to focus on something else. I said at the beginning that grumbling is probably the most socially acceptable sin in our culture today. Let me pause for a second to get some feedback from you. Do you agree with that? Would you suggest another as a more socially acceptable sin? And more to it, why do you think that is? Why do you think today, in the world in which we live, the time in which we experience life, that that's such a common challenge for us? Let me just hear your thoughts.
Jeff, I was thinking of worry being a socially acceptable sin.
Yeah, worry. Worry is definitely up there, isn't it? And if we'll be honest with ourselves, worry and complaining are probably closely connected. I mean, they both have at their heart this question of, am I getting what I want, deserve, have earned? It all comes from a scarcity mindset. There's something I don't have that I want or I need. And sometimes we resort to pursuing that perceived scarcity because we're upset about it and complain, or we're scared about it and we worry. So there's some connection there between them. But I think worry is true.
And I'm probably sitting beside the biggest sinner in the room right now.
Is it well? Okay. Are you beside me and I don't see it? Because I think I might give you a run for that, Renee. Yeah. Yes, sir. I'll come right back to you, Tim.
Do you think that it has anything to do with the fact that you would have to have been alive maybe like in the 30s in America to actually have seriously difficult times in your life? I mean, I'm not saying that like the 40s are terrible or whatever with World War II, but I think that none of us sitting here are old enough to really be in a dire situation in America. The Great Depression was the last dire situation that happened in America.
I think you're really right. I think that a lot of the complaint and relatedly the worry that we have is related to the circumstances of our times. And I, again, just like you, I'm not taking away from the challenges that people do truly face. But here in this country, in this day and age, the vast majority of us will never know real, true hardship like many in this country did generations ago. Or, this is very true to the point, like many do outside of this country and in other places in this world right now today. And because we have such a skewed perspective, I think it leads to more complaining, more worry. Yeah, I think that's right. Tim, you were going to say?
I was thinking about the hideousness of complaining and how it disheartens people. And when Moses sent the spies into the promised land, and 10 of them came back with a very negative, complaining report, where grasshoppers are in sight and things. I mean, it disheartened the whole congregation, and it was a horrible, horrible thing among God's people, just this negativity. Mm-hmm. But then the two, I see the effects. I'm glad that you said that was your number one thing that you brought up about how it destroys gratitude.
Yeah.
People cannot focus on all the good things they do have. And I'm going through some tough times right now, and I got a little overwhelmed a couple of weeks ago, and I went to bed negative, I woke up negative, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to get out of here. I got out of the house, and I thought about that song that we sometimes sing, Count Your Many Blessings. And I thought, I'm going to take this walk, and until I get back home, I'm not going to stop counting my blessings. Mm-hmm. And just to see it. And it's like the song says, and it will surprise you what God has done. And when you really just switch your mind and just say, okay, this 5% that's not going so good in my life right now doesn't take up the 95% that is good. I'm going to spend 95% focusing on
I think that's beautiful. That's a very practical step towards overcoming this, and something that certainly is a mainstay in this discussion of us getting out of that, is to refocus on gratitude, to refocus on the reality of what we do have. And I think that's such an important thing. The other thing you say there that I think is just so critical is how infectious a negative grumbling spirit is. You know, it really is. My middle little, Daniel, is enduring a incredibly difficult lacrosse season right now. He's been voted captain. He's very good. He gives incredible effort. He tries so hard. But they're just not very good. They're just not very good. They got beat the other day, 33-2. Okay? It is really hard to come out of a 33-2 beating and not have a bad mindset. Coming out of that game, talking with him on the ride home, I said, you know, well, how are we going to bounce back from this? And he said, Dad, I don't have any idea, because everybody is so demoralized. And that's all they talk about. They had a game yesterday. It was an hour and a half away, and he was dreading going, not because he doesn't want to play, he wants to play. But he's like, there's a very hopeless kind of outlook. And that is all the talk of all the players. And it is just so infectious that when those negative feelings start to get voiced, it just takes root in everybody's hearts and just drags everybody down and becomes a really, really difficult thing. I don't think that we necessarily evaluate and consider the power that we have in other people's lives when we give full voice to our dissatisfactions. When we complain, it not only affects us, but it affects those around us. Great points. And both of those are really great points. Let me circle back to something that I mentioned a moment ago, because I think this is going to be a really important principle. If we identify that complaining, giving voice to every one of our negative feelings about a circumstance and situation, is first and foremost a revelation of our own heart and something we need to self-evaluate. It's secondly cancerous to our social surroundings, because we're infecting that negativity in those around us. And third, it's so common and socially acceptable that people don't even stop to think about whether or not it's healthy. How do we differentiate between complaint and truly talking to God about something we're upset about? How can we make sense of that? Because we're supposed to be people that evaluate and make sense of our world and consider our world. And so I don't think that the answer is to just be oblivious and assume that everything's great, there's nothing wrong in the world, there's nothing that's unfair, there's nothing that's unjust, there's nothing that needs to be pointed out, there's nothing that we need to talk about and address and say, this is wrong, and this needs to be fixed. There's a place for that. How do we draw that line? How do we understand when I'm standing up on principle and saying this is an unjust act that needs to be addressed, and when is it just me complaining and voicing something that's negative that's going to be infectious and cause God to be very unhappy with me? How we distinguish between those becomes a very important part of this whole process, and I think a lot of it has to go back to our heart to start with. If we acknowledge that a lot of the motivation we have to complain is really a heart problem, then that same principle should be used to distinguish between when we're just complaining to complain and when we're really bringing something to God that we can fix. Carl, help us with that.
I don't know if I can help with that. You're the teacher today. But you said something several months ago that I think kind of points to the problem of complaining. Several months ago, it was said in this class that Satan cannot live in a grateful heart. Mm-hmm. Whenever we feel the need to complain, whenever we're disenchanted, or when we have this so-called righteous indignation, when we can just remember what we're grateful for, mm-hmm. It's going to be real difficult to complain about. So, the example of Daniel and his team, I know he's a really young boy, but could he maybe be grateful that nobody got hurt today, that we have the ability, that we have the health and strength to compete, that we can show the other team, even though we're getting beat really bad, we're just grateful to be there with them. We want to show them the love of Christ. We can be a great example of them. Even in the midst of our turmoil and our terrible play, we can show the other team and even our parents and the people on the sidelines how grateful we are to God just to be out there and compete. Satan cannot operate. He cannot live. He cannot conquer us when we're grateful.
Carl, I don't think there could be a better way to put that. Satan cannot live in a grateful heart. And Satan can't do his work that he wants to do in a heart that is exuding gratitude and thankfulness. And I think that's such an incredibly central aspect to this. Throughout Scripture, we're constantly warned not to give Satan a foothold, not to give him some place that he can cozy up in and make himself at home at. And without meaning to, we do that on a regular basis with our constant complaining and our bad attitudes and our negativity and our focus on what's not right or what's not the way we want it to be. And I think Satan just giggles with joy that he has that opportunity. We've invited him in and asked him to pull up a chair at our table and to take a part in our lives that if we stopped to think about what we were doing, we would never do that. And I think also, Carl, you got another great point in that we are in the best possible situation to show gratitude when we have the least evidence of it in our lives. In other words, it is in the darkest night that the stars shine the brightest. The old saying says, in the darkest night, the stars shine the brightest. It's in the hardship that we're actually given the greatest opportunity to show that gratitude. And if we are in the middle of a 33-0 game that we're getting our pants beat off, and we can, in that moment, show reasons for gratitude, how much better an example that is than when we're on the 33-0 end of it from the other side to say, isn't it great that we're out here? Well, nobody has to work hard to say that. We have to work hard to say it when we're in the middle of the pit. And so I think that those things do work very well together, and that's a really important part. The idea of lament, the idea of sharing with God our true hurts, just like the psalmist does, over and over. How long, O Lord? How long am I going to have to see this? How long is this going to be before my face? He poetically says. How long am I going to have to deal with all these circumstances? You see, we can look at those and go, those are clearly complaints. He is pointing to something in his life that he's unhappy about, and he's upset about it. I would suggest to you that one of the very first things that we need to consider when we're trying to decide, am I bringing God a true, honest complaint, or am I just complaining? I think the first thing we need to think about is the audience. Who is the first one we're bringing this to? Is it directed to God? You ever been in a situation where people sit around and talk about something they're unhappy about, and they know that nobody in that group can actually solve that problem? And you have somebody who can solve that problem that nobody talks to? And how silly it is if we stop and think about, we're all sitting in this little group talking about how bad the situation is, but we don't have any power to fix it. And yet there sits here somebody in the office next to us who could absolutely fix this problem, and nobody brings it to him. In a very cosmic sense, isn't that what we do with God? So I think the first principle is, who are we talking to about it first? Who are we talking to? Are we talking to people who can't solve the problem, or are we bringing it to God who can? Yes, ma'am?
Didn't have to.
Oh, I thought you
Do
did.
you want me to talk?
Yes, I do.
No, I think you made a good point a couple sermons ago about, and I caught myself, like, that snippet you said in a sermon that I've been telling myself, like, what's the difference between complaint boring and just telling God your frustration is what your expectation is after that, right? Like, I tend to want to give God advice, right? Here's my complaint, and here's my advice to you, God, how I want you to handle it.
Yep.
And I think the part of your sermon that I really liked is when you were talking about Mary and the turning the water into wine. There was a problem, and she was frustrated, and so she just looked at them and said, do what he says. She didn't say, go get the vessels, go take the vessels and turn them into wine. Like, she didn't give them all of that. She just simply said to Jesus and looked at the servant and said, do what he says. Period. And I feel like that's where I can like really distinguish between that is what am I doing after I get my complaints to God? I think we should. What am I doing with that afterwards? Am I truly saying, now do with it what you want? Or am I going to be extra disappointed because I give him advice that he didn't?
Yeah. That's a great point. What we are expecting after we voice the complaint is a big indicator of whether or not it is a legitimate complaint or not. And when we say to God, God, this is the problem, and these are the 5 things I want you to do to solve the problem, and this is the timetable on which I want you to do that. We're not following the biblical example. We're not doing what God says, because God says, put it in my hands and let me take care of it. I will take care of it. And when it comes to our complaints, I think that same principle applies. Can we truly say, God, this is an unjust situation. This is something that is wrong. And you are the one who can fix it. And you are the only one that can fix it. And I'm going to put this in your hands for you to solve in the way that you know you need to solve it. And I think that goes a long way to helping us understand it. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering, is it proper to say, is it true that grumbling is a sin, not just an attitude of the heart? Can we clearly say that before God, it is a sin, and we need to repent while we're talking to Him of our complaint?
I won't answer that. I'll take us back to the very verse that we're in. It says, don't grumble as they did. And He sent the death angel and slew them. My understanding of that is God is not capricious. God's not up there basing things on how He feels at the moment. He has a very distinct set of principles by which He wants His people to live. And if it has violated those principles to the point that imminent punishment is upon it, that's clearly a distinction that this is a sin. And I think it is something that's probably the very first thing we need to really grapple with, is do we really believe that this is wrong? Do we really believe that this is sin? And recognize it with the gravity that it is. I think that's a really legitimate point. I think that's good. Yeah, right.
So then can I tell like a really fast story that ties Carl's point and your point together, and an experience that I learned. So back when Noah was probably like 9, he played like hockey. And he was pretty good at hockey, and he played goalie. And we would go to the Battery Hockey Academy, and they would, when Noah was going to be in a game, they would stack travel kids against Noah's team, because Noah was a decent goalie, and then Noah had a good kid on his team, so we would win all of our games, so there would be these travel kids on the team, and me and Robin thought that was so unfair, and we were all grumbling about it and mad. And then Noah had a game where they had 3 travel kids, they had a line of travel kids, and Noah, it was a rough game, they were in his zone the entire time. It was one of those games where it was probably 19-2. And me and Robin are all mad, and we go over to Noah, and we're like, this is going to be hard for Noah. And we get to Noah, he's only 9, and we're like, man, that was a tough game, buddy. How'd that go? And he didn't acknowledge at all that they scored 19 goals. He goes, did you see those 2 that I caught? He focused on 2 that he caught with his glove, and that's all he talked about. He was like, it didn't matter what the score was. He was like, did you see the 2 that I caught? And I was like, yeah, buddy, we saw the 2 you caught. Me and her are mad, and Noah's just focused on the 2 that he caught with his glove. He didn't care about any of the other ones. He only focused on those.
Yeah. So, this is where the infection works in a positive direction. Had you come to him and said, that was unfair, that was terrible, I can't believe they did that to you, you should be so upset, he probably would have responded, yeah, you're right, it was. But instead, he came and infected you with positivity. Did you see what I did? You see how good this went? Did you? And you're left going, oh, yeah.
And then we were laughing because he had one until where he caught 2 and then he blocked one basically with his face. So they shot it and it hit him in the face. And he was like, did you see that when it hit my face? And we were like, yeah, are you
way to use that face, buddy.
And he was like, that was totally awesome.
All the way to the dentist, you were thinking how awesome that was. That is awesome.
So I think that I was just the perspective, right? Me and her were really negative about it. We got to him, and he completely changed our attitude about the whole thing, because he was so excited that he caught 2 with his glove and he blocked one with his face, and we were thinking that oh, there were these kids in there, and he didn't care at all. His perspective is completely different than ours. So I learned something from a 9-year-old.
I think we all learned something from our 9-year-olds.
He was probably younger than that, Robin says. He was probably 7 or 8.
Yeah, a little child will lead them. I think what this does lead us back to, though, kind of where we started, which is that it's a matter of generosity. It's a matter of gratitude. It's a matter of really examining our hearts and seeing if we're being honest about what truly is and the good that can be had, and focusing on that rather than the circumstances that are there.
I know we're out of time, but I just wanted to kind of maybe respond to Mary Ellen. grumbling, we are told, is sinful, but a lot of these lamenting psalms, it's frustration. And that, I think those are different. It's frustration, and then they're looking for a solution. I think grumbling and complaining, you don't really get into the solution or answer or help. So I think that really.
And that goes back to the heart of it, really, doesn't it? I mean, most of the things we grumble about, the things we talk about, you know, the long lines, the delay, the traffic, these aren't things that are morally, you know, confounding to our world. But when the psalmist laments, it's injustice, you know, it's the immoral things in our world that he's asking God to really solve. And the solution, having that solution in front is something really important. I hope one thing I have not done in this class is give you any indication that I'm good at this, because I'm not. In fact, if there's anybody who's a natural born complainer, I am the poster boy for that. And so this is, don't nod. I see that. Don't nod. Don't nod. She's nodding. That was uncalled for. And now I'm going to complain about that. I'm a work in progress. And we might even argue about how much progress is being made. But the reality is, I think this is something that we can all find ourselves in. And I do hope it's something that we will take seriously, what Scripture tells us. First and foremost, because it's pleasing to God. Second, God wants what's best for us. He doesn't tell us to not complain, simply because he has some, you know, he just made up a rule. He understands that in our heart of hearts, we cannot live the joyful, abundant life that God has in store for us if we store up complaint and if we pour out negativity. So let's take that with us this week. Thanks so much. We'll pick it up from there next time.